night to you. I am Thabo Mdluli, and thank you very much for joining us tonight on In Focus as the lead up to the November 1st elections gains momentum with promises aplenty and, of course, campaigning in full swing. Plans to take principled legal action to prevent illegal land invasion, make municipalities load-shedding proof, and increase housing delivery through collaboration with the private sector. These are just a few of the offerings the DA is putting on the table for the 1st of November local government elections. DA leader John Steenhuisen joins us now to unpack this and more. Of course, you're a part of this conversation tonight because of the blackout on Twitter at Newzroom 405. If you wish to give your questions or comment live, send us that tweet, and of course we'll get in touch with you and we will get you on so you can put your questions forward tonight to John Steenhuisen. John, good evening and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening. Great to be with you and great to be with the viewers this evening. Looking forward to the engagement.
Good thing that Zoom is not a part of the blackout. Otherwise, this particular conversation would have been in serious trouble. But listen, what are the big ideas, one you say, as far as your interventions in as far as delivering services to the people of South Africa, right? If you look from the Auditor General's assessment, right, you have issues around administration, right, municipal capacity, financial soundness and compliance. You've got economic development and you've got service delivery. Where are you going to focus here?
Well, it's a focus on getting the basics right at local government, Thabo. I think that's where a lot of municipalities have fallen down. They're just no longer able to get those basics right. The simple ABCs of local government, providing water, keeping the lights on, making sure that you've got sewage reticulation, keeping communities safe. And these are essentially the basics that anybody needs from a municipal government. Our manifesto is a different approach this year. Rather than critiquing the governing party and other parties, what we've done is set out the challenges facing local government in 7 key areas. And then what we've shown is how we're tackling those issues where we've been given the opportunity to govern and setting out what those successes are, and then making the offer to municipalities that don't have a DA government that this is our record of action where we govern. This is what we want to do where you are. And then to cities that we're already governing, our manifesto says very clearly, we've got a record of action, but we want to do more. And so, for instance, let's look at a place like Cape Town. We need to roll out much more infrastructure over the next couple of years to meet up with the demand. People are flocking to Cape Town from all over the country to experience DA good governance and to access opportunities and to access the lowest unemployment rate in the country. That's putting huge strain on the infrastructure. So municipalities like that where we govern, we're going to have to do a lot more in terms of investing in infrastructure to meet the needs of the growing number of people who are semigrating to the city of Cape Town and to the Western Cape in particular. And then, of course, in places like Joburg and Tshwane, there's a lot of work to be done to deal with the backlogs. And we laid 325 kilometers of cabling in Johannesburg in the short period that we were in government there. Obviously, there's a lot more to do to deal with the 25-year backlog on maintenance and infrastructure. So I think for us, it's going to be around infrastructure that feeds into sustaining the basic services that are essentially the lifeblood of local government.
Yeah. How do you gauge your local participation mechanism in the drafting of this particular manifesto? How do you gauge its effectiveness? Particularly, did you list the issues that have got to do with the people more than your DA ward councillors?
Well, it was the most open-ended manifesto process that we've been in, as with our policy process. We had input from experts, we had input from DA governments, we had inputs from DA councillors, and we had inputs from members of the public who have raised issues with us. But essentially, the 7 issues covered in our manifesto are the key essentials that any municipality is going to have to master if it's going to want to survive and succeed in South Africa in the current environment, particularly given the constraints that we have with a national government that is stumbling and faltering in terms of meeting its need of the bargain. And in all of these areas where national government has had a monopoly in the past, we see local government having to step in and protect its citizens from national government failures. Key issues like policing, key issues like electricity, key issues like water provision water sustainability. These are key areas where municipalities are not going to be able to just sit back and wait for Pretoria to provide. They're going to have to get in there to protect their residents, because their first duty of care is to the people that trust them with their vote, not to national government.
Yeah. If you look at the Good Governance Africa Index, top 3 performing municipalities, Mossel Bay, Senqu, and Swartland, 2 out of those 3 are DA-run municipalities, 1 being an ANC-run municipality. However, how do you respond to the criticism that even though you run some of the best municipalities, according to numbers, there has not been a shift to providing equitable services to the majority of South Africans? Your best services have always been provided to those of higher income levels who are predominantly white.
That's simply not true. And I think if you take a place like the city of Cape Town, for instance, 40% of the residents in the city of Cape Town get free basic services from that city. It is the most comprehensive pro-poor package of services to any sector of the population, far outstrips anything that any other metropolitan government is doing. The reality as well is that where the DAs governs and where the good governance comes to bear, the biggest beneficiaries are poor South Africans who are able to access public transport systems like the My City bus service that works, able to access and take advantage of trains where the DA is now stepping in and providing, the DA government of the city of Cape Town and province are stepping in and providing security. Best run healthcare and schools in the Western Cape. Those are the poor people who benefit from that the most. So I reject absolutely as propaganda and simply fatuous and not based in fact, the fact that the DA is not pro-poor. In fact, having a clean, efficient, effective government is the most pro-poor thing that you can do, because you're able to provide the services that poor people need to be able to make their lives work better in DA governments at far greater levels. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying that where we govern is a Garden of Eden. Absolutely not. We suffer with the same problems that beset many South African cities, and apartheid spatial planning, big backlogs, huge numbers of people, and rapid rates of urbanization. And so are we there yet? Absolutely not. Do we still have a long way to go? Absolutely. But are we far further down the road in providing basic services to more people in a more affordable way? Absolutely. There's not a metro or government that can come close to anything that the DA is operating anywhere around the country. So we're not perfect, but we're a lot further down the road than anybody else. And that is as a result of good, clean, accountable government that spends money on the people and delivering services.
So, I mean, if you look at when we were going into lockdown last year in March, right, the community of the oldest township in the Western Cape, the Langa community, right, they say, we have not had water in months. For us, lockdown is just going to be impossible. The washing of hands is just not going to happen at all. Yet you're saying every community where you are going to govern, you will have access to reliable, clean running water that is safe to drink and to prepare food. You've not done that in the 5 years that you've been on. Why should we believe that you will do that going forward?
But I mean, I think there's a very, very big difference to having a water outage and for somebody not having access to water at all. Yes, there is times when infrastructure fails and water is, services are disrupted. It's a natural function in any municipality around the world. Your services are not fail-proof, and they will from time to time go down. And yes, we have had problems, and I said at the beginning of the program, with infrastructure, which is why the city is going to spend billions more now on rolling out infrastructure. And DA municipalities are going to spend money on fixing the underground services, because they are the backbone upon which anything else is advanced. So yes, I mean, water does go out from time to time in places in the city, but I would challenge anybody to find a city in the world where there's 100% supply of services 100% of the time. Yeah. We aim to get those restored as quickly as possible, but there's no area that is not supplied by or has access to clean, available drinking water in the city. Obviously, where you have informal settlements on private land, where people have invaded land or have been allowed to settle there, it makes it very, very difficult. And the city obviously has to try and get in there and provide services under difficult circumstances. And there is going to be a huge pressure and backlog in providing services in those areas. But certainly in all of the established areas, established township areas, highest access to basic services is in the DA-run City of Cape Town and the DA-run Western Cape, and that's according to government's own figures.
So how are you going to deal with that? Because ultimately, when you become a government, you become a government for all those people. So Magazi region, for example, in Khayelitsha Township, the Kraaifontein situation, the Skalo situation, some of those areas it's not a water not there from time to time. It's just basically there has been no services. They've got to walk kilometers just to be able to get clean water.
Well, as I said to you, there's some areas where people have settled that may be an informal settlement. It may not have been a planned township development where the city was able to be prepared. It may be on private land, but the city certainly spends a lot of money on access to that. But as I said at the beginning of the program, there's going to be billions more spent on ensuring that we massively ramp up the infrastructure build, particularly if we're going to start densifying around the urban core and encouraging more and more people to move closer to the city through social housing and social housing development, that the city's going to have to invest in that. There's not a city in Africa, I would submit, that doesn't have to actually look very, very carefully at the rapid rate of urbanization that is taking place and put in place measures to be able to ensure that when residents do come into the city, that they, as quickly as possible, have access to basic services. We're not, as I said, we're not perfect. We don't get it right 100% of the time, but certainly in DA-led governments, it's far more advanced than anywhere else. I mean, I was on Sunday in Lindalani Township in Ekurhuleni. They've sat 20 years without water and electricity, despite many promises. There's still no water there. There's still no electricity. And I'll compare a place like Lindalani with a place like Khayelitsha, Langa, or Gugulethu. The difference is as stark as night and day between those communities.
Right, when we continue next with John Steenhuisen, here's what he's promised on electricity.
You will learn of the DA's mission to make 6 pilot municipalities in the Western Cape load-shedding proof in what they call the Energy Resilience Project. These municipalities are putting in place measures that will enable them to procure electricity directly from suppliers and ultimately end their reliance on Eskom altogether.
Right, we ask him more on that when we come back on In Focus tonight. You can tweet us as well with your questions for John Steenhuisen at Newzroom 405. In Focus continues in Democratic Alliance. John Steenhuisen tonight, who joins us to unpack his party's manifesto and the 7 areas in which they're promising to bring a delivery should you vote for them in the upcoming local government elections at Newzroom 405. That's where we are on Twitter if you wish to give your question or your comment live tonight on air to John Steenhuisen. Send us those tweets. We'll get in touch with you and put you live tonight. So, John, you make this promise of making 6 pilot municipalities in the Western Cape load shedding free. First and foremost, before you get into the nitty-gritties of it, how do you identify the 6 pilot municipalities? What's the criteria?
Well, they're all DA-run municipalities, so they've got the guts to take on national government and the ability to be able to roll out electrification using the alternative energy model. They are all highly capable municipalities. They're all Category B municipalities, and I think they're well placed to be able to lead the way in pushing the envelope of local government's powers in the face of a failing and crumbling national government who's unable to provide the services needed.
Yeah. How do you quantify this thing of capacity, right? For example, you've got the Kuilsrivier police station where the Family Violence and Child Protection and Sexual Offences unit is found, closed for 5 days, right? In part because there was no water, but also there was also vermin infestation. I mean, would you say there's capacity there?
Well, Public Works and the National Police Department are responsible for those police units and that sort of thing. So I'm not sure where they've dropped the ball, but it's certainly not a municipal job to go in and deal with vermin within national government-controlled buildings and the like. So police stations are not the purview, unfortunately, of local government. I wish they were, and we're busy fighting for greater police powers to ensure that those sorts of things don't happen.
And so you are saying you've got adequate capacity where you are governing. For example, I'm giving you this particular area where I know policing, of course, is in the purview of national. However, crime prevention is still the responsibility of the mayor in that particular area.
No, it's not. Crime prevention is the responsibility of the SAPS. But what is increasingly happening...
But that is why the mayor would have an MMC for safety and security.
Yes, but we don't have any mandate over the South African Police Service or the specialized units that they have within them. What we do have is where we do have metro police departments. They're able to supplement the work of the South African Police Service. Local government has got no control, even in a monitoring capacity, of the function of policing in South Africa. The only thing it is responsible for is traffic and bylaw enforcement, and that is generally where most metro polices are meant to focus. But in our cases, our metro polices have had to move into crime prevention because of the failing South African Police Service that cannot keep people safe on the streets anymore. And that's what's certainly the case in places like Cape Town, places like Nelson Mandela Bay, where the metro police is increasingly having to play a bigger role precisely because of the lack of resources, the poor equipment, and the lack of capacity, as you've spoken about, in the national policing realm. The Constitution is very, very clear about what the role of national and provincial government is in relation to policing, but local government sphere has got no oversight of the SAPs whatsoever.
I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to the question of electricity. Let's stay with policing a little bit. You want all South Africans to feel safe and protected in their neighborhoods with this localized law enforcement or a single police service. How are you going to achieve that? Because currently it's seemingly a political football where the police minister is blaming you for creating a parallel structure where you want to channel resources to affluent areas and not giving, for example, police visibility and presence where it's supposed to go.
How ironic. This is the same police minister who's throttling and starving Gugulethu, Langa and Khayelitsha by not providing adequate SAPS resources there. They're the worst police to population ratio stations in the entire country. So I don't think the minister should be in any position whatsoever to start pointing fingers. And I think it's precisely that situation that has forced local and provincial government to now step into the gap. And in fact, the policing units that we're providing are doing the bulk of their work in places like Khayelitsha, Bonteheuwel, Langa, in the more depressed areas where gangsterism and drugs are rife. The Metro Police has had to set up a specialized drugs unit to take the fight to the drug lords on the Cape Flats. The SAPS are completely overwhelmed. The LEAP program that the city of Cape Town has partnered with the provincial government in the Western Cape to do is the one thing that's providing some form of protection for people in those communities. And speak to any one of the brigadiers from the SAPS in those areas, they'll tell you if it wasn't for the supplementation of manpower by the Metro Police's LEAP program, they would be losing the war against crime. In fact, we've had to step in because Minister Cele cannot provide safety for ordinary South Africans. You shouldn't have, as a Metro Police, having to step into this area if you had a functioning, competent national government.
I suppose the South African National Defence Force has also had to step in at some point because the situation in the Cape Flats could not be contained and be brought under control.
Well, I would say the same thing happened in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng over the course of the violence, where the SAPS completely lost the initiative and were unable to keep South Africans safe. All those South Africans were left to fend for themselves as the police retreated in the face of violent looting, which I think goes again to show that we have a police service in South Africa that is wholly unsuitable and unfit for purpose in terms of what it needs to do. International best practice, if you look around the world, is on localized policing, using localized police services, city police services, municipal police services, provincial police services. Minister Cele has got this dream now that he wants a single police service where he can absorb all the resources that he doesn't pay for at a national government, and he wants to get his hands on the Metro Police Service because he can't stand it that they show up continuously, his failing SAPS, with an excellent conviction, arrest, and a record of being able to get guns and drugs off the street. It's a matter of national embarrassment for him, which is why he would like to get control over those. The fact that the army had to come in the recent unrest and violence in places like KZN just, I think, shows even greater how national government and how the national policing model has failed South Africans and is unable to keep them safe.
Yeah.
Just ask any one of the residences in those areas where looting, violence, burning, and shooting was the order of the day for that week and a half of violence. So they will tell you that the SAPS cannot it does not protect them and does not keep them safe.
So in a sense, I suppose your promise, so this particular element on policing is still an aspirational goal, which you still are going to have to take the fight to the National Police Department. It's not something that you can deliver on immediately.
No, we are already delivering on it. The Western Cape government has paid for and provided 1,100 extra police personnel to supplement the police service in the Western Cape. The city of Cape Town has taken on 500 new officers to be able to deal with crime and criminality. It's not something we're talking about. It's not something we are painting castles in the sky. It's something we're doing already. And that's the great thing about our manifesto. If you look at it, it's based not on promises. It's based on what we're doing already, on things we know that works, from electricity to basic services to the very matter of policing that you're talking about now. It's already happening on the ground where we are in government.
And let's talk then about the question which you're saying now around housing. In fact, let's hear what you're promising on the housing situation, while the national budget, of course, is the one that's holding much of what needs to be delivered as far as houses are concerned.
And while the national housing budgets are being slashed, DA governments will increase housing delivery through smart collaborations with the private sector. We will also continue to push national government to release suitable tracts of state-owned land in cities to help us deliver quality housing options close to work opportunities and major transport routes.
How are you going to deliver low-income housing to families who are poor in well-located areas? That's the question.
Well, it's great. We're already doing it. It's one project in Conradie in Pinelands, which is going to release 3,600 units. There's other projects in the inner city, the Helen Bowden Hospital and many, many other sites around the well-located city centre that have been identified, and the projects have begun. The Conradie one, as I said, will release 3,600 units. There's other projects that have been identified in the urban core, which will release another further 2,000 units. What we need now is for Minister de Lille to stop hanging on to the nationally owned pieces of land, which are the big ones where you're able to ramp up at scale, things like Acacia Park, where the MPs are currently located, Wingfield Air Force Base. All of that is excellently located land well within the urban core, on public transport routes, on my city routes, and we need to unlock that land now so that we can do bigger projects at scale. What you don't want to be doing is having to develop projects way outside of the urban edge. It's too expensive to roll out services there. It puts people far too far away from the economic opportunities that they need, as well as the services that they would rely on. So it makes sense to densify around the urban core, and that's certainly what our proposal is, which is why the infrastructure spend on particularly preparing for that densification is going to be absolutely essential. And then there's our plans on site and service. We're already doing site and service. In the last year, there were 19,000 housing opportunities that were made available by the Western Cape provincial government in conjunction with the city. So it's happening, but I think the big problem we have, not only in Cape Town, but across the country, and I would say the continent, is the rapid rate of urbanization. It's happening at a rate far faster than government can keep up with. As small municipalities in the more rural areas collapse under the weight of neglect and poor services, people migrate to urban areas to access those services and opportunities.
Were you blindsided on that fact that people are migrating to urban areas, or at least that you need to provide housing in central business districts, when you thought of auctioning the Sea Point SABC building to a private buyer until the courts had to stop you?
Well, we don't own the SABC building. It's owned by the SABC, not the city. So I don't know. That wouldn't be able
the social justice lobby groups are actually criticizing the DA administration for selling that building.
I think you're talking about the Sea Point building in Sea Point.
Yes.
It's not the SABC. It's an old school building in Sea Point. And the decision that was made there was that selling that to a commercial developer would release far more cash, which could then be used to bolster far more efficient and effective land use and social housing projects in and around the Woodstock, Salt River area, where you'd be able to get far more value for money out of that. You can't just use every piece of available land for housing. There may be some that makes commercial sense to be able to get more cash in, so that you've got more cash to spend on providing more units. So just because you have a piece of land in the urban edge doesn't mean that every piece of land in the urban edge needs to be set aside for social housing. It's got to be a rational economic decision, and it's got to be a decision that makes sense and focuses on maximizing the potential rather than just trying to do something symbolic.
What about the 11 parcels of land that you already announced that you were going to release? Salt River, Market, James Street, Woodstock, Hospital Park,
yes,
New Market Street. When are those going to be brought online?
These projects are all in various stages of progress. We're also looking at excess golf courses within the city of Cape Town's urban edge as well. I think there's places where you've got a proliferation of golf courses. We've tasked the city to have a look at how we could release those well-located pieces of land to be able to also use for mixed-use developments where people can live, work, and play within the urban edge, accessing services that are already there, schooling opportunities that are already there, health services that are already there, and of course, the big one, access to the economic opportunities that are already there.
John Steenhuisen stays with us when we continue next on In Focus. Tweet us at Newzroom 405 if you wish to give your input as he unpacks the manifesto of their party leading up to November 1st local government elections. Stay with us. With us tonight here on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. Conversation tonight with the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen, as he unpacks for us some of the promises or the ideas they have in the upcoming local government elections, particularly for the metros or the municipalities which they govern. Of course, when you look at the various indexes, they'll tell you that some of the best run municipalities are, of course, those that are run by the Democratic Alliance, particularly 60% of them being in the Western Cape area. But when, of course, we sent out our reporter, Atim Tongane, to get a feel and a sense on the ground as to what people think, here's what she found out.
Cape Town is certainly one of the most attractive cities in South Africa. Governed by the Democratic Alliance, it has received numerous awards as a tourist destination of choice. Areas like Camps Bay, Hout Bay, Clifton, Bishop's Court are evidently well serviced. Although crime remains high across the province, these affluent areas have less reported incidents of violence. The EFF has accused the DA of using its budget only to benefit those around these communities.
The Democratic Alliance take all the budget to Camps Bay, Bishop's Court and all these areas. Our people are vulnerable here because of wrongly voting.
When you visit the other side of the picturesque Table Mountain, the view is very different. Blocked drains and uncollected refuse have become a norm. Sewage spills over into some of the residents' homes.
The truth of the matter is that these disparities exist across South Africa. And of course, we're not there yet in addressing them, but are we further along the way in terms of addressing than any other metro in South Africa? Absolutely. And that's not by our own propaganda. It's by government's own reports. It's by Ratings Africa's own report. It's by the Household Access to Basic Services report. More than 40% of Cape Town households have access to free basic service. That is a great record, but it's not good enough. We want to do more, which is why our manifesto commits to addressing those backlogs far faster. And we are far more advanced in doing that than any other municipality in the country. We don't want to be the best band on the Titanic, though. We want to build world-class cities that are inclusive and are growing and provide people the dignity and safety that they deserve.
This COVID-19 informal settlement in Mfuleni is a prime example of the growing need for land and housing in Cape Town. The EFF has been accused of influencing illegal land occupation.
We are not pushing illegal occupation, but we are in support of people who are in desperate need for a place called home, so that they would have shelter over their heads and they would be able to arrange for their kids to be able to stay here in the Western Cape, against what the DA refers to as refugees coming from the Eastern Cape.
Whichever way one looks at it, those who end up running the city will have to service two very different cities. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Tim Tongana in Cape Town.
John Steenhuisen with us still tonight. You can tweet us, by the way, at Newzroom 405. John, what are your plans for the COVID-19 informal settlement in Mfuleni?
Well, obviously, it's the same thing we've got planned for every informal settlement, to do in situ upgrades where possible. But in many of these areas where land has been invaded, egged on by parties like the EFF and others, the land is unsuitable for development, either because of dolomite in floodplains, etc. In which case you've got to move and relocate people like that to more suitable land and suitable developments where you're able to develop. Not every piece of open land is suitable for housing. Some of it would be impossible to roll services or top structures onto. Where possible, though, and where there is well-located land, and there have been land invasions, and there have been informal settlements spread up because of the rapid rate of urbanization that I spoke about earlier, the first prize is always to immediately try and provide sanitation, electricity, and water so that you can make sure those people live in dignity, and then look at doing an upgrade. But the reality is that a city's budget is finite. It's not a bottomless pit. You've got to budget, and yes, it does take time. Some projects have got to be done over a number of financial years, so it doesn't move at the pace that you necessarily would like. It's also a matter of financial constraints.
How far is that particular community from the upgrade that you talk about?
I'm not familiar. You'll have to ask somebody who's closer to the city around that. I can't drill down into specifics for each city in South Africa, but I certainly know that in terms of a general trend, that is the DA's policy, is to do in situ upgrades where possible. Where it's not possible, to relocate people there. But obviously in the constraints of a backlog, there are lots of informal settlements around Cape Town. There's lots of informal settlements around every city in South Africa. And it's going to take time to address those backlogs and also to make sure that your infrastructure is caught up to be able to deal with those as well.
Yeah. Talk to me then about this principled legal action that you're talking about when it comes to the question of land.
Well, of course, we want to be able to then take action against national government when it won't release well-located public land for housing purposes. I cannot believe, for instance, that we've got the Minister of Public Works, who, whilst she was the Mayor of Cape Town, was writing to the then Minister of Public Works, telling them they better release these pieces of land or else. Now that she's in the position as Minister of Public Works, she's now stalling on releasing those pieces of land. We believe that in some instances, cities are going to have to litigate to act in the public's interest to be able to secure those well-located pieces of land so that it can deliver on the mandate to ensure people are able to live in dignity in houses that enable them to live a life of value.
Is that your plan to respond to illegal land invasions?
Well, if you have illegal land invasions, it often makes the situation a lot worse because it's very, very difficult to roll services out or to do any construction if you have a piece of land that has already been invaded. And as I said earlier, not all land that is open is necessarily suitable for housing. You don't want to build a housing development on a floodplain. You don't want to build, or it's impossible to lay services in an area that has dolomite underneath it. And so in those instances, you don't want to have people invading those pieces of land because it's going to be impossible to roll out services there. So in some instances, you are going to have to protect property rights and ensure that the rule of law is upheld and that you prevent those types of land invasions from taking place.
Yeah, you're going to find yourself in a situation where instead of building houses, you're going to have huge legal costs, which already are huge because generally you fight these things in the courts.
Yes, but I think there also is a principle about protecting the rule of law. And I think if you look at what happened in Johannesburg, where the city council did not protect the rule of law and allowed massive land invasions in Eldorado Park, in Riverlea, and in other parts of the city, they now end up with a bigger problem on their hands because you've destroyed the rate space on the area surrounding. Those pieces of land are completely unsuitable for you to roll out services and deliver houses there because they are not possible to be built on. And you end up with a far more expensive problem there than had you got a court order to prevent the invasion of the land in the first place. So I think it's a case of being penny wise and pound foolish if you don't take action in the cases that warrant it, to ensure that you secure that land and make sure that you don't have people invading unsuitable land or unsafe land where it will be impossible for you ever to be able to provide housing or roll out services.
Now, one of the stories that we have been running with on Newzroom Afrika for a while now is, of course, that story of migrants occupying the UN offices there in Cape Town. And it's an on and off and an ongoing situation where you'd want to reintegrate them into communities, and they're saying, no, we are not comfortable in those communities because there is this resentment towards migrants because of this perceived impact that apparently they have on service delivery. What is your plan to deal with that resentment?
Well, you've got to stop populist politicians from whipping up people against each other. The reality is that we are a country located in Africa, that we are going to have people from other countries coming here, just as people from South Africa sought refuge in other countries in our more recent history. I think that in many instances, some of these, well, the majority of these immigrants bring huge opportunity. And if only we allowed skilled immigration, many of these people are doctors or are qualified professionals, but because we've got such a bizarre and skewed immigration system that punishes skilled immigrants and rewards unskilled illegal immigrants, it makes it very, very difficult. And you build up that resentment in communities. If we allowed people to operate in the professions that they were trained in, many of them, and certainly international practice shows, and The Economist magazine carried a very excellent article called Light Bulbs in Their Luggage, which detailed how actually skilled immigration and immigration into a country can actually help it advance going forward. But what we have in South Africa is people who want to take the shortcut. It's very easy to whip people up against a group of people or people who they perceive as a threat to them, and then to get people to turn on that. It's a very, very dangerous game, and we saw the end game of that with the xenophobic violence that broke out. I think that we need to be a compassionate country. I think we need to be very tough on illegal immigration, but we should be welcoming skilled immigration because those people bring skills, and I think they can add value to communities, and I think they can add value to our economy as well.
Right. Now, there's a lot of anxiety around this particular issue. It's big, so we'll come back to it and touch on it a little bit. As you mentioned already, it threatens social cohesion, but also informal traders. How are you going to deal with that, and how do you plan on integrating migrants and locals to have access to the economy properly, and access to health, and access to housing as well? When we continue next with the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen. Tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405. Otherwise, of course, we'll get in touch with you and put you on so that you can put your questions live tonight. Stay with us. We're live with you tonight here on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, channel 405, in conversation with the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen. A couple of days ago, they presented or launched what they call their manifesto, and unpacking some of the details of that. Some of the tweets are coming through tonight at Newzroom 405. That's where we'll take your comments tonight and questions for the leader of the Democratic Alliance. Before the break, tackling that question of migrants, John, it is causing a lot of anxiety. In fact, some political parties are using that as their key campaign messaging. We've had some of them here on the show as well around that. So others would say interventions such as basic wage, access to food, land and housing for all could certainly deal with this level of anxiety and this wrong perception around migrants in the country. What do you say?
Well, I'll say they're looking at it from the wrong angle. Why is there anxiety? Because there's a fight for a dwindling resource. Jobs are dwindling. money is dwindling, economic opportunities are dwindling. I believe that if we get the economy growing at the rate it should be going with the right policies in place, there's going to be plenty of place in the sun for everybody in South Africa who wants to put their shoulder to the wheel and make a contribution, earn a living. The reality is that the economy is just simply not growing. We've had years of negative growth, and so you've got people that are now scrapping it out for the crumbs in an economy. We should be baking far more loaves to be able to give many, many more people opportunities. And I said we've got to be tough on illegal immigration. We've got to be, I think, far more open to skilled immigration, particularly from other countries in Africa, because I think there's people then that bring ideas, businesses, opportunities, startups into South Africa, and we can only benefit from that. As I said, the international literature all shows that when you have a proper skilled immigration program, that it benefits a country's economy. It doesn't hinder it. And I think that parties that are whipping people up against others on this basis is very short-sighted, because it can end dangerously and it can end in a deadly way. And I think we don't need violence in South Africa. We don't need people attacking each other. We need people working together to build the country and to grow our economy and create more jobs. And if everybody, if we had an economy that was growing at 6 to 8%, if we didn't have a 42% unemployment rate, I can guarantee you we wouldn't certainly be having these problems. The problems arise because there is a dwindling resource and lack of opportunity, and that's what's fueling the resentment, not the fact that the factors that many others opportunistic politicians talk about.
Yeah. There is one municipality, I hope I'm pronouncing it correct, I think it's called Beto, in the Western Cape, that is currently crumbling. Governance there is crumbling because of a standoff between the ANC and the DA there. It had 11 seats, and one of the councillors passed away there. I think now it's 5-all at this particular point. But I want to talk to you there on the question of coalitions. What have you learned as far as coalitions are concerned? Because one would criticize the DA, for example, to say you united with people because you had a common enemy at the time, and because you didn't like that particular party, you say, no, let's join forces, and you'd realize that ideologies, they differ, and that, in its sense, kind of reversed even the work that you had tried to do in those municipalities.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we've learned a lot over the last 5 years around coalitions and coalition management, and I think that there were lessons that were very well learned. The key takeaway for me is that you can't do coalitions with people who don't share not necessarily your ideology, but your core values and principles. Because if you cannot bring people together around those core values and principles, you're never going to be able to build a stable enough coalition to be resilient enough to get through the tough decisions that are going to have to be made in that municipality. I think that we've also learned that informal arrangements are not desirable, that it's not desirable to live from council meeting to council meeting, that you need a written agreement, coalition agreement, that sets out very clearly what the objectives are, what you want to achieve in the 5-year term, but also sets out very clearly what the red lines are. We won't tolerate interference in the administration, manipulation of tenders, manipulation of appointments of senior municipal staff, and that we would be prepared to walk away under those circumstances. So I think it's more about values and principles than it is necessarily around ideology. I mean, if you look at the ideologies of the 3 or 4 big parties that are knocking it about to try and form a coalition in Germany, for instance, admittedly, it's a lot more of a mature democracy than ours, but their ideologies are different. But, you know, they will come together at some stage around a common set of values and principles to drive a coalition government forward. That's how most of Europe is governed. It's how the Nordic countries are governed. And as the ANC starts to fall below 50% in more municipalities and later down the line in provinces and nationally, these things are going to become a feature which we're going to have to master as South Africans, as messy as they may be.
Right, let's take some of the tweets. This one from Koza JK saying, DA only focuses on so-called whites and are neglecting places where black people live. Ask the DA leader, when is he going to fix potholes on Lansdowne Road between Guguletu and Khayelitsha?
Well, I think it's completely untrue, and I think that if you look, the city spends the bulk of its budget in poorer, more depressed areas, and because obviously that's where the backlogs are. I mean, it's a bit unfair to ask a national leader to fix potholes, in a road I'm not familiar with, but I'll make sure there's a note of that, and we can see what we can do to fix the potholes on that road. What was the road's name?
Lansdowne Road in Khayelitsha, the road between Khayelitsha and Gugulethu.
Okay, I'll ask the mayoral candidate, Jordan Hill-Lewis, to get onto that as soon as possible.
Yeah, because ultimately that's what it comes down to, right? Local government is an opportunity for the people, the residents, to interact with those who are in the administration to deal with issues like roads and infrastructure.
But I would hope that people, were able to. The city's got a very good reporting line. It's got a case. It gives you a case number where you're able to report potholes, electrical faults, etc. And if that doesn't work, I mean, there's always the ward councillor. So I think that I would hope that people, would be able to contact their ward councillor. It's impossible for me to know every road in the country and to know where the potholes are. But as I say, I've got the road's name now. I'm happy to direct the team in Cape Town's attention to it.
Now, of course, the big issue around the Cape Town area generally is the lack of water resources. And there's been a whole lot of talk around the refurbishment of infrastructure, but adoption of technology and other ways in which water can be saved, but also water can be cleaned and then given to people. What are the plans if you are given another 5 years?
Well, I mean, I think it's a conversation we're going to have nationally as well, and that's our relationship with water. And we're a water-scarce country, and yet we flush clean drinking water down the toilet. We use it to wash cars, etc. So I think there's going to be a fundamental shift in our relationship with water as a country. In Cape Town, we learned a lot of lessons during the drought there, the 100-year drought, and we were able to successfully mitigate against it and avoid day zero, where we were able to ensure the taps didn't run dry. And it was a function of both managing the demand side and getting residents to reduce their consumption, as well as managing the supply side. I think we're going to have to build more dams. We're going to have to look at more creative ways to recycle water and the like, and to be more careful about making sure we have infrastructure where we avoid excessive leaks, where you have massive leaks. And that's one of the key focus areas for DA governments, is the war on leaks, where we've been able to significantly reduce the number of leaks in DA-run municipalities, so you prevent good, clean, fresh water from simply disappearing out of your system. So there's a lot of things that we're going to have to do and change. But what's absent as well, unfortunately, is a national water strategy. As you know, national government is responsible for the building of dams and the management of bulk water, and municipalities are responsible for the reticulation thereof. So the National Department of Water Affairs is going to have to up its game significantly and start planning far more ahead so that we're able to deal with these crises when they happen. Nelson Mandela Bay, where I am this evening, has got a huge problem. The dams are running dry here. Work that should have been done in dams that should have been finished by the Department of Water Affairs many, many years ago were put on the back burner, projects extended, all sorts of tender problems and the like. The reality is now there is an emergency here, and Nelson Mandela Bay is now facing a water crisis because there's been a lack of planning. So I think we've got to be far more proactive across all spheres of government, local, provincial, and national, in developing a plan that resets our relationship with water in South Africa.
Speaking of being proactive, alternative revenue sources for municipalities, quite key, because this reliance on grants from national is not sustainable, because as you mentioned earlier on, there's only so much money that is available, and when that money is finished, there's no more.
Absolutely. So municipalities are going to have to increasingly do more with less. I think that given the collapse of the economy and the shrinking property market, rates income is going to significantly decline. As we encourage more residents to get off the grid using solar and other power alternatives, and as we change the relationship with water, those revenue streams for municipalities are going to, pardon the pun, start to dry up quite significantly. So municipalities are going to have to be creative in terms of being able to deliver services with not necessarily the same income that they have, which means they're going to have to work smarter. Cities themselves are going to have to resize themselves A lot of the administrations are far too large for the amount of services they provide. And there are many, many municipalities across the country, and I've visited many of them over the last 4 months, that exist on paper only or on a map at Cogta's office. You go into those municipalities, they don't fulfill any one of the 5 key objects of local government set out in our constitution, and essentially become a point for grant funding to just come from national government, pay salaries, and deliver a single service.
John Steenhuisen, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us tonight in Focus and helping us with this conversation. That's where we're going to have to leave it for tonight.